Hello everyone and welcome back to a Magic the Gathering Commander Deck List Reviews. So this is a series where I go through either my own personal decks or those submitted by users and break them down to their core mechanics. I talk about the commander, what the deck's generally trying to do, give my critiques, and wrap it all up with my thoughts at the end. If you want to get your own deck reviewed, make sure to go to the top link in the description to get it reviewed by me. But besides all that, let's get into today's episode. Today we're reviewing a card that technically isn't even out yet from the new Final Fantasy set. A lot of hubbub around it and a lot of cool cards from it. One of my favorite being this guy right here, Vivi Ornitier. So this is kind of an insane commander. We've gotten a lot of really good izzet spellslinger commanders over the years, but this guy kind of takes the cake, I think. This deck is built bracket 3. It's very much, I think, a good candidate for sort of CDH Storm if you wanted to go that direction. Or even, honestly, I think it could be a really cool sort of Voltron Spellslinger deck. But Vivi is nuts. So he's a 3-mana 0/3 wizard, very important, and has a really weird ability where you just, instead of tapping for mana like, most things do, kind of restricts its abilities with, having to wait a turn or give it haste somehow. He just has an ability that says 0, add X mana in any combination of blue and or red, where X is Vivv's power. Activate only during your turn and only once each turn. So really, those last two restrictions are not that bad. The fact that you can activate this instantly, it's not sorcery speed, and there's no restrictions on what the mana can be used for is just nuts. This means, this is straight up just a mana dork for whatever you're using. It doesn't even have to be Spellslinger, because, a lot of our Spellslinger dork type stuff is restricted to instant sorcery or non-creature stuff. This guy's just amazing. And on top of that, he also has a triggered ability that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on him and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. That's, kind of the super nuts part about this. And, this, of course, is kind of a cantrippy deck where you're playing a whole bunch of 1-drop things to crank up his power and then activate him to, cast even more things. And there's a lot of things you can do with this. It's also sort of a burn deck. We got a little bit of a burn category here, but of course it's, your generic Spellslinger type stuff with, a little bit of a unique things mixed in here for Vivi specifically. So of course we got a few board wipes. I think it's really cool running Chandra's Ignition in here because we are usually going to have a pretty big Vivi at some sort of point. So we can cast this, pretty much wipe everything out, keep Vivi around because, we have a few other creatures. Actually, I think we have a good amount of creatures in the deck, but we really don't care about keeping too many of them around besides Vivi because it just does everything that we need. Just kind of a cute board wipe for what we're doing. Kind of not something you see a lot in Spellslinger. Blasphemous Act, of course, as well. Just something that kills everything. And I mean, maybe at some point we can even get our commander big enough to where it doesn't kill him. Actually not the hardest thing ever if you look at the deck list and just what you're able to do. But yeah, kind of just generic stuff there. Burn, so of course Vivi itself deals with damage to each opponent whenever you cast a non-creature spell, so we have a few more of those type of things. You can definitely kind of crank that up if you wanted to. I didn't want to put too many of these in here because you kind of have to balance all of your, Spellslinger type stuff with all your payoffs. So I wanted to make sure we had a good amount of non-creature spells to creature spells. So Coruscation Mage, kind of just our better gutter snipe anymore. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with Offspring, so you can get a 1/1 copy of it for an extra 2 mana. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Firebrand Archer is the exact same thing, except it doesn't have Offspring, so just more of that. Same thing with Keswick Flame Breather. Just a bunch of stuff that when you cast non-creature spells, like an extra VV trigger pretty much. Just burn them a whole bunch extra, but really the biggest one out of all of this is O'Hare. O'Hare does an insane amount of damage. Just as a commander by itself, it deals damage equal to its power whenever we deal non-combat damage. Specifically, when a red source we control deals combat damage to a player and it's less than its power, it just deals that much damage. So really what this means is if you have O'Hare and you also have VV out, whenever you're casting non-creature spells, you're just dealing 4 damage base every time you're doing that. And, you can only deal 10, of those triggers to people before they start dying. There are a few pump effects in the deck, so you can kind of mix and match them. Most of the pump effects are specifically for Vivi because, of course, we want to pump its power so we can add a bunch of extra mana. But you could also pump that into O'Hare if you really wanted to really get that burn plan going on. You could definitely make it way more burny, like Torbrand type of stuff, or even like some of those like tripler type effects if you want to do a bunch of damage this way. But we've got a lot of other cool stuff to play with in the deck as well. Lots of card advantage, of course. We're a cantrip deck, so most of our 1-mana cards are going to be drawing us more cards, or just some ways to draw more cards because we're going to be casting so much, over and over. We are also running a few fewer lands than a lot of other decks do because our mana base, for the most part, our curve is fairly low because we're casting a bunch of very small stuff. Plus, our commander usually gives us an insane amount of mana, so having a giant, really good, or not instant speed, but hasty sort of effect, being able to add mana, turn 3 is really, really good, so we don't need as much of that kind of stuff. But in this category, we got Archmage Emeritus, of course, Magecraft, just draw a card whenever we cast or copy instant sorcery. Ashling also allows us, it's got a weird ability where on its third Magecraft trigger, we get to add 4 red mana. But really the biggest thing I like about this card, for the sort of ramp piece of it, is the fact that you don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. So if you have a bunch of extra mana because of Vivv and you don't have anything to use it on, you can just kind of stack that each of your turns with Ashling. But her first resolution, whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card, or discard a card, and then draw a card. So good little rummaging effect, not super huge. Most of the other stuff of the card is kind of what we're looking for, but that's, it does have card draw on it. Brainstorm, of course, kind of just the generically good spell, draw 3, put 2 back. Not a whole bunch of shuffle effects in this deck. If you want to add more fetches, of course, Brainstorm always becomes better when you have a lot more shuffle effects in the deck. But just generically, of course, we're going to be running it. It's a, really good cantrip. Consider, again, just another good cantrip. And we've got a few of these curiosity effects. There's no infinites in the deck. I tried really hard to make sure there wasn't because I didn't want to build something super crazy. There's already so many different ways to combo and izzet. I kind of want to make a little bit more casual style of deck, but we do have these sort of effects. Because our commander, of course, is dealing damage to opponents whenever we cast these spells. We have curiosity, just says whenever enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. So whenever we cast on our creature spells, we're not only getting them off of whatever cantrips or whatever draw us cards that way, we're getting repeatable card draw off of this. We've got curiosity. We've also got Ophidian Eye, exact same thing. It's 3 mana, has flash, and then we have Tandem Lookout. Same thing again, except it has Soul Bond. So that's kind of nice. Just a lot of ways to draw extra cards off of that. Expressive Iteration, just kind of a generically good, not technically a draw spell, but ways to get cards into your hand. Faithless Looting, again, just generically good draw spells kind of all around. I like Frantic Search. Frantic Search, I've said this in a lot of videos, but I love this card because it immediately gives you all your mana back. And specifically in this type of deck, spellslinger type stuff, we have a lot of mana cost reducers in the deck. And so a lot of times this could actually net you mana if you're able to cast this for 1 or 2. Really, 1 is the best. You draw 2, discard 2, untap 3 lands for 1 mana. So you can kind of ramp even off of that, which is really, really cool. Get Probe, just, a free spell, that kind of stuff. We are running 3 Game Changers, one of them being Jessica's Will. Of course, just an amazing card. Add 7 red mana and exile the top 3. For 3 mana, if we control our commander, which we probably will be, a very, very good card. Fist of Flames. So this is a really, really cool one. The only thing I don't like about these type of things, and like Storm in general, is you have to be keeping track of, certain pieces of the game. With Storm, it's just generically cast trigger, making sure you keep track of how many casts or cards you've cast this turn. Fist and Flame, you want to keep track of the number of cards you've drawn this turn, because it says draw a card until end of turn. Target creature gains trample and +1/+0 for each card you've drawn this turn. So you keep track of that. This is basically another cantrip, but on top of it, you can buff Vivv, a whole bunch. It's very easy to draw a whole bunch of cards with this deck. 10 plus in a turn. Just kind of saving up for this card, or maybe you end up drawing it. Most of the time, if you've got a few cards in your hand, it's worth just keeping track of the number of draws you have, just in case you're into Fist of Flame, and kind of waiting to cast or activate Vivv until the very last second. We do have, in the deck a few X spells, so we can have ways to dump that mana into different places. So that's definitely a part of the deck, using all of our mana from other sources that are, our mana rocks or lands or whatever, before we act Vivv. That way we can get as much mana out of them as possible, since we only get 1 per turn. There is a lot of things you could do with him, more towards the combo route, where you have flicker effects. you know, there's a bunch of different ways to flicker this card over and over and over again. You know, displace your kitten. There's a few instant sorceries that allow things to bounce to hand. But for this deck, we didn't run any of those just because, you know, I feel like the one time is good enough. And I also, another hard part with Izzet is you can solitaire very easily where you're just taking a very, very long turn. And this deck might end up doing that. I think the more you know what you're doing, the easier this gets with the deck. And because it's so explosive, you're usually taking one long turn or one semi-long turn. You know, we don't have like a bunch of Krark stuff in the deck. I think we are running Krark, but we're not doing a whole bunch of like maybe this or trigger. It's usually just draw a few cards, do some damage, and then you just kind of keep going. But yeah, again, a whole bunch of extra, just all of our cantrip type stuff, draw some cards. Sorcerer's Class, I really like Sorcerer's Class in this deck for all variety of reasons, mostly for the level 2. I really like, of course, 2 mana, draw 2, discard 2 is kind of whatever, but its second ability to give creatures the ability to tap for mana to cast instant sorcery spells, of course, is extremely good. Give our creatures that most of the time, like our Archmage, isn't doing anything. It's not attacking or blocking. We want to keep it out. Giving that ability to do something. Just sitting on the field is kind of nice there. Finale of Revelation, of course, draws us cards. And if that's 10 or more, then we instead shuffle our graveyard into our library, then draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and we have no max hand size for the rest of the game. So finales, of course, once you hit 10 mana with these, the effect gets a lot better. So good mana dump for Vivv, and also, of course, drawing a bunch of cards for us. Virtue of Courage. So this one's really cool for a deck as well. Of course, you can play the instant part of this to just deal 2 damage to something, whatever, you know, kind of a shock type effect. But it, as the enchantment, says whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you may exile that many cards from the top of your library. You'll play those cards this turn. So it's kind of just every time that you're dealing damage with Vivv or, you know, one of our other burn effects, you're able to exile, you know, sort of impulse draw from the top of your deck as well, on top of whatever other draw you may already have, or of course the cantrips themselves, whatever they're doing. So you just get a whole bunch more value off of that. Really, really cool. I don't see this card played a whole lot, and so I like being able to put weird cards like this into a deck that can really make a lot of use out of them. And of course, Windfall. You could run a whole bunch more wheels if you wanted to, especially, you know, if you're going for the more Fistive Flame type of effect, where you're just like, okay, a bunch of card draw type stuff, because that's a lot of what the deck is trying to do. You can go that direction, but, you know, kind of just generically Windfall, put in any blue deck just because it's a very, very good card. Interaction, we're not super interaction heavy in this deck, as weird it is for an Izzet deck. I say this on a lot of my videos, but it's something that you could definitely pump up more if you wanted a lot more interaction. My meta is not super heavily interaction based, so I don't have a whole lot in the deck, but you can definitely, you know, ramp that up. A lot more counterspells if you wanted to. I think we have a lot of the good removal in our colors. Of course, Chaos Orb, just because it's a catch-all, very good. Got a few counterspells, Arcane Denial, Counterspell, and Swan Song. You know, good, just kind of low-costed, easy to cast. The cool thing with these as well that I like is if you have some sort of draw effects, I actually have with a few of these games that I sort of goldfished, seeing that you if you need to, you could, you know, cast your Into the Flood Maw on something, then counter it to get extra, you know, spells off of that. So, you know, there is that sort of dual modalness to our counter spells if you really want to use them that way, just kind of an extra thing. But you could totally run a whole bunch of this kind of stuff. Flusterstorm would also be really good because we are, of course, a storm deck. So even if someone tries to interact with you, that's kind of just a catch-all there for 1 mana. Pongify, Raptor Hybridization, of course, also just more destroy spells for creatures. And Snap's really cool because not only does it trigger Vivv, it's also like Frantic Search. It gives you your mana back by untapping 2 lands, and of course, if you can reduce that, you can maybe ramp with this, bounce something to hand. You could even really, the cool thing with this, if you wanted to bounce Vivv back to the hand to reset his ability, but of course, the only problem with flickering Vivv is if you don't have some sort of static buff to the game, like some sort of Lord effect on the battlefield, then it's, you know, you're resetting his counters as well, so you're kind of starting from square one. You definitely could, if you wanted to, run like the Ozolith would be a pretty good card in here, since you are putting counters on Vivv. That's something you could totally do if you're going more of the flicker route. But yeah, all around, nothing too crazy within our interaction suite, though. Of course, there's many things you could add in here. And like I said before, we're not running a whole bunch of lands. We're only running 33 in the deck. And that's mostly because our curve is so low and we're drawing so many cards. If you're playing a cantrip type deck, you just want to keep drawing cantrips on cantrips. you know, not only do we not need a whole bunch of mana because they're cantrips, but we want to make sure that we're not, you know, breaking with lands. You know, if you cast 1, 2, 3 cantrips and you're drawing a whole bunch of lands, that kind of just screws up your turn, especially because we're, you know, we're sort of a storm deck. We want to be able to cast a whole bunch of stuff on the same turn. Notable lands in here, just sort of the generically good dual lands that we can add in here. On top of Mystic Sanctuary, always good to have in literally any deck that runs blue. Just kind of an extra little ability to return stuff to the top of your library. Insert sorceries, get a little bit of extra value out of that. Of course, running Reliquary Tower because we're going to be having a lot of cards in our hand, and a lot of time we're going to have over 7 because we're just drawing so much stuff. But besides that, kind of just the normal type of thing. You could definitely add more to this. That's something I always say is mana base could very much be upgraded, you know, easily. You know, the new Tarkir blue land that makes your stuff uncounterable, that sort of thing. But any number of fixing, it's really not that big of a deal, though. For isn't what we're doing, especially with our commander giving us whatever, you know, the fixing we want. It's just any combination of colors for whatever we want to cast it on. It's not as big of a deal in this deck as it is in a lot of others. Ramp, we have quite a lot of ramp. I've already talked about a little bit of it. Of course, Jessica's Will ramps us. Ashling, its third trigger, gives us 4 mana and keeps our mana around. Sorcerer's Class, I already said, allows on its second level to have our creatures tap for mana, which is really cool. I also put all of our cost reducers in here. So stuff like Realm Monsoon Sage, it's got a bunch of crap it does on the back, but mostly with its back and its front, it gives our instant sorceries cost 1 less to cast. Stormcatch Mentor, just sort of a better Goblin Electromancer. Thunderclap Drake, you know, kind of our generically good spells. You could add a few more of them if you wanted to. I even had the medallions in here at one point, but really, you don't want too many of these effects because not only are we running mostly cantrips, but our generic mana doesn't usually go above like 2 or 3 colorless mana on stuff. So if you get too many of them out, they're kind of just useless on top of each other. Runaway Steamkin, I like, you know, when you cast red stuff, every 3 red spells, you get 3 red mana, so that's kind of cool. A little annoying to track and make sure that you use correctly, but, you know, kind of just a good card. Very easy to put in here, and it does give us a lot of extra. We've got our sort of basic mana rocks in here as well. Soul Ring, Felwar Stone, Arcane Signet, Talisman of Creativity, sort of the normal stuff on top of that. Burgi, very, very good add, especially with our sort of cantrip plan. Whenever we cast a spell, we get red until end of turn, and then, of course, until end of turn, you don't lose this mana steps and phases end. Kind of nice if you do something during combat, I guess, or, you know, if you counter something at a weird time, you can keep that mana around. But mostly the fact that when we get a mana back whenever we're casting things, sort of the same thing with Stormkiln Artist. Whenever we cast or copy into a sorcery spell, we create a treasure token. This one, of course, is the best because it just gives us a permanent amount of mana. You know, it's not floating. We have to keep it around if we don't want to use it, and it's any mana that we need on top of that. Besides that, you know, Mana Geyser is just also a really, really good card. You know, very explosive, 5 mana. You know, if you are turn 5, no one's even ramped, and everyone's usually tapped out. You're trying to use their mana every turn. Getting, you know, paying 5 to get 15 mana off of all 3 of your opponents is very, very good as well. And then we have a pretty big amount of value in this deck, the kind of just weird random stuff. You know, there's a lot of good stuff that you can run in these decks that's kind of all over the place. Of course, Bria is really cool. And that's another thing you can also kind of go in towards with this deck is prowess stuff, like giving our commander prowess because that's pumping Vivv until end of turn, giving it a bunch of extra power to be able to add a whole bunch of extra mana. So Bria gives other creatures we control prowess, which is kind of the biggest thing. And I guess, you know, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we can give target creature we control unblockable. So if you are running even like, I think this is good not only just for the way we're running it, the prowess way, it's very good for the Voltron type thing because you can give your commander unblockable, get in with commander damage. And even if you're not, a lot of times you might just take someone out of the game with commander damage because not only you're kind of getting 2 power every time you cast one of your cantrips, you know, 10, and that's pretty much it. Very, very good in this deck. A lot of cool different stuff that you can do with it. But mostly the prowess is very cool. Harmonic Prodigy, of course, is bonkers in this deck. Not only does it double trigger Vivv, it triggers most of our creatures because most of our creatures are not really shamans but mostly wizards, so that's really cool. It itself has prowess, kind of an interesting thing, but mostly the fact that we're getting a whole bunch of extra triggers off of everything. Same thing with Veyran being even better here because it's just when if you casting or copying a sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control, the trigger that ability triggers an additional time, so it's kind of just better Harmonic Prodigy. It's anything we have that triggers off of casting a sorcery spell triggers an additional time, and you know, getting both of these out, you get get a whole bunch of extra triggers, which is really nice. I am running Krark in here, mostly for the fact that either we get an extra cantrip off of whatever we're casting, or, you know, if we do lose the coin flip, which honestly, a lot of times we want to be losing the coin flip with Krark, because we cast the thing, we get the cast triggers off of casting the thing, you know, whatever Vivv's doing, and then we have a whole bunch of Magecraft cast triggers off of our creatures. If it gets, you know, bounced back to our hand, we just get to cast it again over and over and over again. If you have like a Stormkiln Artist, that's kind of the best case scenario, because every time you cast it, you're getting the mana back for your cantrips. It's just as many times as you can do that. That's really nice. Marvin, I've always wanted to put him in some of these type of decks because he's a very good card, especially if you can kind of just throw him in the 99. So he just has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as him. So of course, for playing Commander, you're not going to have creatures with the same name as him. So this is literally just kind of another Vivv. It doesn't have the same triggers, of course. You know, it's not going to grow most of the time. If you have like a Bria or something out that gives him prowess, maybe. But even then, just playing this 2, getting 2 mana off of it is kind of just nice in and of itself. Can also, you know, copy stuff like Stella Lee. Stella Lee is just an amazing card. You know, it's broken in a lot of different ways. Whenever we cast our second card, each turn we exile the top card of our library until the end of the next turn when we play that card. And as long as we've cast 3 cards this turn, we can copy target instant sorcery spell we control by tapping it. So Marvin's good for both of those abilities. Stella Lee, just in general, a very, very good card. You know, if we've got a Jessica's Will or something on the stack at the right time, copy that, or just any of our spells is very, very good. One of our other game changers in here is Mystical Tutor, just, you know, tutor for an instant sorcery on top of our library. I just thought, you know, we might as well, if we're going to be running like a Jessica's Will or anything, you might as well get the 3 game changers you can in your bracket, because it's not that hard anymore, especially since they've added quite a few new cards to it. But just the things that we need, you know, a lot of times to kickstart stuff, or if you know, get our specific pieces, because we do have kind of down here a good amount of win cons, just to make sure that we're getting what we need at the right time. Haze of Rage, sort of one of our payoffs here. It's got Storm and says creatures we control get +1/+0 till end of turn. So of course this is sort of the same thing as the draw spell, where we just get power equal to the amount of cards we draw on this turn, though this is just can be strictly better a lot of times because it's creatures we control rather than a target creature. So this as well, we can also buy it back, which is kind of the insane thing, and a lot of times that buyback cost could be free. You know, if you're getting 2 mana off of your whatever reductions you have, or if you got your Stormkiln Artist or something that's making you extra mana on top of that, you could cast this over and over and over again. I guess that's technically the one way this deck can really go infinite, is this card, giving your creatures infinite power. And of course, every time you cast this card, it's ramping up your storm count as well, so that's really good. But mostly this card is great for Vivv. You know, until end of turn, pump can get really, really big, so we can add a whole bunch of extra mana. And honestly, on top of that, if you really wanted to, off of Vivv's mana, cast this 1 or 2 more times, or, you know, a bunch of times, depending on how many spells you've cast. Kind of just one of our better cards. It's not really a win condition, because it doesn't really get us there to the end of the game, but a really, really good support piece. Past in Flames is really, really nice. It gives each instant sorcery card in our graveyard flashback till end of turn. Flashback is equal to its mana cost, so you just get to cast it from our graveyard and then exiles itself. And then Past in Flames itself has flashback for 1 extra mana from the graveyard, so you get to do that twice. So just another way we can reuse our cantrips, which is really, really cool. You could definitely run a lot more of that kind of stuff in here as well, the flashback type stuff, or stuff to cast from graveyard if you really wanted to a little bit of extra value, because we are running through a lot of our cards very fast. But I just a few of them here, I think, kind of seal the deal, give us a little bit of extra support. Prof's Eidetic Memory is really, really good in this deck. It's a 2 mana legendary enchantment that says when it enters, draw a card. You have no max hand size. That's just kind of in and of itself pretty nice. But at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you draw more than 1 card this turn, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of cards you draw this turn -1. So again, sort of that same thing, you know, after we've drawn a whole bunch of stuff off our cantrips and we still have a little bit more to do, or we've run into some sort of X spell win condition finisher. Go to combat, maybe hit someone with something with how many cards we've drawn this turn. Basically just put a whole bunch of counters on Vivv, no matter what, go through combat, and then whatever power it has, just add that much mana and then spend it on something really, really big. Step through for any of these Izzet decks, and any deck that cares about wizards is very, very good. I didn't actually understand when I first saw this card why it was in a lot of lists, but it's got a really, really stupid busted ability. So it itself is a 5 mana sorcery that says return 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. That's kind of sucky. What we care about is wizard cycling. So Wizard Cycling is a really, really nice effect because not only is it's not a cast trigger, it's an activated ability of the card, making it really hard to counter unless someone's running like a Stifle. It's a tutor. So you're able to pay the 2, discard it, and then search your library for a wizard card and put it into your hand. Most of the time, it's probably going to be like a Harmonic Prodigy or a Krark or something, one of our many creatures. It's tutoring up a lot of cards in our deck, which is really, really cool. For 2 mana, instant speed, uncounterable pretty much. It's just a very, very, very good tutor spell. And lastly on here, we have Savor the Moment. Savor the Moment is a really, really cool instant or extra turn spell. It's 3 mana extra turn spell instead of the normal 5 rate. It says take an extra turn after this one, but you skip the untap step of that turn. Of course, we don't really care about that because our commander doesn't require any sort of tapping to activate its ability. So it's kind of just, you know, if your commander even has like, I don't know, 6-7 power and you have a few things you can cast, or even just get an extra card draw, maybe you hit something off of that, paying 3 for this, getting that extra turn. You still basically get a whole new free turn off of that because of how much mana our commander can make. So that's really, really cool. Another really kind of niche card that works really well with our specific deck. And of course, to the really cool thing here, and the biggest part about this deck is once we have all this mana, once we cast all this stuff, the way that we win. So the biggest one here I would have to say is Aetherflux Reservoir. So this is a 4-mana artifact that says whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. So it's sort of life gain storm, and it's another reason you basically want to keep track of your storm count almost no matter what turn you're on, because this card's going to come out of nowhere a lot of times, something you want to cast, you want to get down, because you know you're going to be gaining on the first spell 1 life, usually if this is your first spell, then 2 life on the second spell, then 3 life on the third spell, and it just kind of, you know, gradually goes up and up and up and up, very easily getting to the 50 life that you need, because this also has the activated ability that says pay 50 life, it deals 50 damage to target creature or player. So that's just, hey, shoot someone for 50, they die. So as long as you, it's sort of just another storm outlet, really. It's very similar to Grape Shot, which Grape Shot just does 1 damage to any target and has storm. Very, very similar in the exact same way, where you're just casting a whole bunch of stuff and then doming someone for a whole bunch of damage on top of it. And of course, even if you've got someone's gaining a little bit of life off of whatever, Vivv is also dealing damage just everyone on top of that. So Aetherflux is kind of overkill, but we kind of want to have the necessary win con just in case. And besides Aetherflux, we have Crackle with Power, which is, you know, just kind of the exact same thing, but in sorcery form. It's triple X and 2 red for a sorcery that says this deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So really this gets way, way better the more you're able to pump into it. And of course, our commander is going to give us a good dump. I think the best X spell in our deck by far, because it basically allows us to kill everyone. You know, if you're paying even 5 into the, or 15 into the X, dividing that by 3 to get 5 into the X, you're dealing 25 damage to up to 5 targets, and it's not divided either. It's just that much damage to X targets. So if you are paying 5 into that, you're doing 25 damage to 5 targets, so 125 damage. So that's usually killing, you know, dealing a whole lot of damage to all of our opponents, and then, you know, doming whatever creatures and whatever, removing something on the board, which is really cool as well. But really, I think this is our biggest way to just end the game on kind of out of nowhere with, you know, prior prep. The only thing bad with Aetherflux Reservoir is if you get it a little too late in the game, you really want to get this at the beginning of your turn, because otherwise, you know, maybe you didn't keep track of Storm. That's kind of a bad thing, because you're like, that's kind of a hard thing with Storms. You really need to keep track every turn. But if you get this too late in the game, even if you do end up gaining like 10 life because you've cast so many spells, it's really the compacting of spell after spell after spell life gain that gives you the amount of life that you need to shoot people. Otherwise, it's not really going to get you there. Crackle Power, though, as long as you have the mana off of Vivv, you can cast it whenever in the turn. It just immediately kills everyone, which is really cool. Epic Experiment, sort of a finisher. It just says exile the top X cards of your library. You may cast instant sorcery spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. Then put all cards exiled this way that weren't cast into the graveyard. So this is sort of a win con in the way that if you dump, you know, like 10 mana into this, you're exiling the top 10 cards of your library, and then really I think that's going to get the ball rolling fast enough that you're just going to be casting enough things, getting enough value that you're just going to end up winning the game off of that anyway. Most of these X spells, even the other finale that just draws us cards, that is also kind of up here, and just a card that if you cast it for enough, you're probably just winning the game. Speaking of finales, though, we do have the red one as well, Finale of Promise. It says you may cast up to 1 target instant sorcery card and or up to 1 target sorcery, or 1 target instant and or 1 target sorcery, so you can do one or the other or both. From your graveyard each with mana value X or less without paying their mana cost. And then, of course, if you spend 10 or more, you copy each of those spells twice. So, if you've got, something like a Grape Shot and then, I don't know, a Brainstorm or whatever in your graveyard, probably not the best spells in the deck, but something like that, you're getting 3 copies of each, which is really cool. Or one, the original, and then 2 copies of it. So you're getting 6 spells on the stack off of that, which is really, really cool. With Finale Promise, just another thing that's like, if you're able to, copy something once or twice with that, most of the time that's going to end up getting you the game. Already talked about Grape Shot, just kind of the same thing. Storm off enough, it's just going to kill people with how much damage it does. And then, of course, with our flashback type stuff, you could just kind of go through it again. Jaya's Immolating Inferno, again, is just kind of sort of a worse Crackle with Power, but I kind of want to add in here just to make sure we had enough things to cast, that if we do end up getting a bunch of mana, we have something to put out with it. It's legendary sorcery, so you do have to control a legendary creature or planeswalker to cast it, which of course we will most of the time. It deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. So this is just kind of kill the creature or kill our opponents with it. Even if you can put like 12 into this, you're dealing a whole bunch of damage to, opponents. Just kind of a little bit of a weaker way to either get ourselves closer to the win by hitting our opponents, or kind of that final nail in the coffin as well. Mizzix's Mastery, so it says exile target card that's an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it, and then you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. It's sort of worded weirdly because it has overload, so normally it's a 4 mana sorcery to exile 1 thing to cast it for free, but if you overload it for 8 mana, you're able to cast each. So you're basically, overload is kind of a weird thing where it just says replace each instance of target with each. So like Damn, it destroys 1 creature or target creature, and then if it's overloaded, it's each creature. So you exile each card that's instant sorcery from your graveyard and cast them all for free. Again, most of the time that's going to get you there with most of our things. We don't have a whole bunch of X spells. The only thing that's bad with some of these are our X spells that, you can't pump mana into them. They just immediately go on the stack. But just overloading this a lot of times just ends the game anyway, because you're getting so much value off of it. You're casting so many different cards. You're drawing a whole bunch, refilling your hand. If you really, this is really, really good with like a Stormkiln Artist or something with Magecraft, really anything with Magecraft, because you're getting a whole bunch of extra value off of copying as well as casting, which is really, really cool. And our final game changer, kind of another way to kind of just put the final nail in the coffin and being able to use our graveyard a little bit more with Underworld Breach. So of course everyone knows it's a 2-mana enchantment, and it says each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. Its escape cost is equal to its mana cost plus exiling 3 cards from your graveyard. So this is really the best if you with Storm cards, because you're able to sort of buy it back, like the card earlier, where you cast Grape Shot for like, I don't know, 10 or whatever. As long as you've got a little bit in your graveyard, which most of the time you're going to have a whole bunch of cantrips and a lot of stuff. You're discarding a hand size or wheeling or whatever. Casting Grape Shot, 1 or 2, 3 times with an Underworld Breach or whatever. A lot of people might go like the Brain Freeze type route, where you're milling everyone out. That's another card you could very much add to this deck. But I was kind of trying to stay a little bit away from the combo aspect of this. But yeah, just another way to kind of make sure we can finish out the game. But yeah, that is our Vivi Ornitier deck. A really, really cool card. I'm probably going to be doing quite a few of the Final Fantasy commanders because I think they're really, really fun. I'm not actually a huge Izzet player. I'm not a huge Spellslinger player, but I think this card is so fun and so powerful that I really, really wanted to see kind of what you could do with it. And who knows, I might even at some point end up building a really strong one. I do like with certain archetypes pushing them to their absolute limit. But here, there's so many different ways you can go with it, which is another thing I really like with it. It's not just the generic Spellslinger, like a Veyran deck where you're just kind of getting triggers. There's so many different aspects to Spellslinger, especially with this card, that you can kind of go into, where I think there's a lot of variation. Every Vivv deck is not going to be the exact same, which I think is really cool. But besides all that, I hope all of you have enjoyed this video. If you want to take a look at this deck list, I will leave a link to it in the description. And if you want to check out the rest of the videos I have done, I will leave a link to that playlist in the description as well. But besides all of that, I will see all of you beautiful people in the next one.